So, I just stepped away. I'm so used to having a mic that's attached to me. So something I really love here is this podium, because I was a pastor for 20 years, and when I came in and I knew I was going to speak and I saw this, I felt so at home. So I also noticed that just like in a church environment, people come early to get the back seats, which I totally get. So it is, I'm going to put this back for now. It is really nice to be here and to be with you. I want to thank the school administration for letting me spend some time with all of you, addressing some uncomfortable realities, things that can be happening sometimes right under our noses with our kids during the holidays and really at any other time. Realities that might portend anything from minor sadness in our kids all the way up to, God help us all, suicidal depression, which of course, that's exceedingly rare, but also every parent's worst nightmare, which makes it both very important and yet very difficult to talk about. So, Merry Christmas. I know it's certainly not the cheeriest subject matter, I get that, and maybe that's one reason why there are like 40 people in this room instead of 1,000 people in this room. One reason, I'm sure. It's not easy to talk or think about our children feeling sad. So I want to thank you for coming tonight. It says a lot about you. I hope when you leave here, you'll feel like you've been equipped with some insights or tips or perspectives that can help you to feel more confident doing this super scary job that we do as parents, trying to get our kids successfully through these really tough, really challenging years for them and also for us, right? And get them out into the world as at least partly healthy and prepared citizens, although I do like to say it's not whether your child is going to need therapy, it's just a matter of what the topic will be. That's a joke, but kind of not. So the holiday season, and by this I mean from Thanksgiving through New Year's Day, is a time obviously where the context is joy and celebration and gratitude and merriment and all of those things. So when kids feel sad or disconnected at this time of year or anxious, it's especially difficult, especially challenging for them and for us as parents who love our kids and desire above all things really just for them to be well. We have all kinds of dreams for our kids, all kinds of things that we hope they end up being and doing. But really, our number one desire for our kids is just that they grow up and that they are well. So I hope what I have to share with you tonight can help you really to be more aware of things that your child may be experiencing or maybe just more vulnerable to through the holidays. Second, I want you to be able to empathize with your children as much as possible. And third, I want you to be able to respond to your child in ways that they will be likely to view as helpful, because I don't know how long all of you have been parents, but probably most of us long enough to know that things that we do that we think are tremendously helpful often turn out to not really be. So the first and most obvious thing to be aware of is when a holiday approaches, and it's the first holiday season after a child has experienced some kind of significant loss, the death of a parent, the death of a pet, a sibling, a grandparent, or someone else special to the child. Could be anything. And I got to thinking, how when you're on an airplane and the person stands up to make that really boring speech at the beginning that nobody pays any attention to, and one of the things that they say is in the event of loss of cabin pressure or whatever, and then they say pull the mask down and put the mask over your own face first and make sure your oxygen tube is clear before you put it on someone else. And I got to thinking about that, and I realized that is huge. when it comes to dealing with our own kids, to dealing with, loss during the holidays, but really with everything involving our kids. Because as a parent, you can't support your child through a loss that you're not dealing with yourself. As a pastor for 20 years and now as a counselor in private practice, when parents ask me, what is the one thing I can do that will make the biggest difference in the life of my child? My answer for 15 years has been, deal with your own stuff. Deal with your own stuff. When we're courageous in facing our own fears, our own failures, our own flaws, our own losses, we'll be able to respond much better to those that our children may be facing, not only during the holidays, but at all other times as well. If we as parents, if we are denying or minimizing or blaming or ignoring or eating our feelings or, in other ways not dealing with loss in a healthy way, well, somehow we will model that to our children. We will. There's no way that's not going to come through. No matter how healthy and well-informed our words might be. So the best gift you can give to your child during the holidays and every day of the year is a healthy and whole you. Another potential difficulty that your child might struggle with is holiday travel. Individual children vary greatly in how they respond to disruptions and changes in their schedule. For some kids, some of you may have one of both. For some, there's nothing more exhilarating and awesome and fantastic than getting in the car and going somewhere or flying somewhere or camping or whatever. But for other kids, that's really, really stressful, really difficult. And it's really a lot of it's biology, it's genetics, it's temperament. Your child may become irritable or withdrawn or easily frustrated if you have a child like that gets tense with travel. And the greatest danger is that as parents, that we might interpret this moodiness as a sign of like a lack of gratitude or even sometimes a deliberate attempt to sabotage the family holiday. And this won't usually be the case. And so if a parent's response is punitive rather than supportive and empathetic, it likely will lead to greater stress on the child and more acting out behavior, more bad attitudes, and just an overall downward spiral in the relationship between parent and child over the holidays, which is the last thing either the parent or the child wants. So generally, it's a good guideline to assume, really, that anytime you or your child have made a change to the child's normal routine, flare-ups in their behavior or attitude are likely to spring up and are likely to be attributable to the stress of the change. And here's the thing, right? This is something that isn't really that obvious on the surface, at least. Even when the changes overall are positive, even when the child is going to see a grandparent that they really love, or maybe there's a dog there that they look forward to playing with, or maybe there's certain toys or whatever it is, and the child may be very excited, but that doesn't mean it's not stressful. In fact, sorry to say this in this company, I just want to say all of you, not all of us, but the whole going on trips and getting constipated thing, right? Adults do that, right? We do business trips, we do whatever, and we fly somewhere, we drive someplace, and our system isn't used to whatever our routine is. So it shows up in adults in that way, plus others. So it certainly will impact our kids' mood, our kids' behaviors. But at this point, some of you may be thinking, man, do I really have to pander that much to my kid? When I was a kid, My parents threw me in the truck and said, "We're leaving. Deal with it." They expected me to behave, and if I didn't, I got the belt, or I got yelled at, or grounded, and I turned out fine. You know, we hear, counselors hear versions of this so often. So even though it's a bit of a digression from our topic this evening, I think it's worth addressing. So 200 years ago, there was no such thing as anesthetic, right? And if you ever put any time at all into contemplating that, it's horrific to think about what it would have been like to be alive during that time. It sounds horrifying. So if you needed an operation back then, you got to like bite down on a stick or something. You know, there were no antibiotics, right? So people just got sick and then got sicker and then got sicker and then got sicker and then maybe got better, but maybe not. If you go back far enough, I mean, you can always find things that were very different than they are now. And of course, you'll find that even then, back in those times when things were different, of course people managed to live and cope with their lives. What choice did they have? But in the case of anesthesia, right, that doesn't mean that it was somehow better for people to experience that horrible suffering that we can now avoid most of the time. In the case of antibiotics, that doesn't mean it was better for people to get so sick and die so often from illnesses that are now easily treatable. And it isn't better for children to be punished for being irritable when we often can have a pretty good idea what's causing it and how to address the root cause in a way that will more often, not always of course, but more often preserve and maybe even deepen and enhance the trust and the connection between the parent and child, which is, you know, like I said, I mean, earlier, our dealing with our own stuff is so important. Why? Because it's our own stuff that keeps us from having a healthy relationship with our own kid, and then they grow up not knowing fully how to be healthy either. And so what it comes down to, really, I mean, as parents, we worry about so much stuff, and we're involved in so many things with our kids, and we have so much fear a lot of the time. But really, this whole thing hinges on the quality of that relationship. I mean, it really does. Everything else builds on that. And no parent would say to a child before surgery, you know, your great-grandfather had his leg amputated, and he just bit on a stick, and he liked it. You don't need that fancy anesthesia. I mean, that's just, it's, right, you laugh, right? Because it's so ridiculous. It's so mind-blowing. No one would do that. But people don't hesitate to say, oh, that's pandering to my child. You know what? A lot of times we know better now what we need to do than we used to when I was growing up and when you were growing up. And we have tools today that help us understand human emotions and behaviors and motivations better than at any time in history. That's amazing. Though we will continue making progress, right? And surely in that process we'll discover some stuff that we believe now that maybe turns out not to have been true. Right? Certainly if you think of the field of nutrition or like diets or whatever, that changes like every 5 minutes. Like eggs are good, eggs are bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad, eggs are good. So stuff will turn out, you know, not to have been accurate, but generally we'll do far better if we avail ourselves of the knowledge that is available to us. Knowledge that has allowed us to escape or minimize human suffering that prior generations would have given anything to avoid. And are we really okay anyway? That trauma or suffering that we may have faced as parents, that awful thing that happened to us, the punishment, the hostility that may have existed in our home as children, that alienation from our parents, or that maybe absent parent, or that wounded relationship, or whatever? Is that just something we put in the past and now everything's fine and we're fine and our kids will be fine? I'd suggest that it's probably the other way around. Those things usually are harmful to children. And without the tools to cope sufficiently, broken children grow into broken adults. And you all know that, right? You've all had that moment, maybe many of them, where you're out doing something and just sort of randomly a thought pops into your mind. Wow, I thought I'd have my life more together when I was a kid by the time I got to the age I am now. You know, we sort of assume that there, like, a point comes where we're like done. It's like, I'm whole now, I'm complete. And the older we get, the more we go, oh my gosh, that's never going to happen. Like, everybody is kind of winging it. That is so scary, right? So we have to deal with our stuff. The world's it can be a scary place, and raising kids is one of the scariest things. Okay, so rant over, back to the topic at hand. The next situation to be aware of, not only is the stress of travel sometimes a challenge for particular children, but the stress of family relationships may be difficult for a child. And I'm not saying anything you don't know when I say that we can almost define family as the people we love the most, who we get the angriest with, and who have the greatest potential to wound us, to hurt us. That would be one of the best ways to describe family that I can think of. And if you, as a mature adult, dread that Thanksgiving political conversation with your Uncle Gus, think about how much your child might fear or dread something that they know is coming over the holiday. I mean, folks, we can't live authentically if we can't be honest with ourselves. And honestly, sometimes the stress certain family members bring into our lives is something we may need to protect ourselves or our kids from. If your Grandma Betty is constantly critical, and your child is feeling down or distressed, or maybe even if they're not, it might be in your family's best interest sometimes to put up some good boundaries and decide not to expose yourself and your child to the criticism. There's nothing wrong with that. After all, you can love someone with all your heart and not accept their abuse. We can love people from afar. Sometimes that's the best way to love certain people. From afar. A farther, the better. So watch the relationships that your children have with their extended family. Once you're looking for this, you may easily spot signs that your child is maybe being bullied by a cousin, or frequently criticized or humiliated by an uncle or aunt or grandparent. And if this is a pattern, your child may become depressed or anxious during the holidays. The next circumstance I want to address is especially close to my heart, which is dealing with children who are introverted. This is a huge generalization, but it is generally safe to say that introverted children often grow up feeling like freaks. Introverted kids notice at an early age that they're different from most other kids. They don't want to sing the goofy songs at camp. They don't want to. They don't want to go out and play. They're perfectly fine indoors. Thank you. Usually they're much quieter. They're much less confident maybe about speaking up in groups, much less desirous of attention and being singled out, even for compliments and praise in groups of people. If you have an introverted child, simply the act of having a lot of people over to the house may be a gigantic stressor for that child. They may become nervous or withdrawn. Introverts are the minority in our country and often feel alone and misunderstood. I mean, this is incredible. This is a lot of what I do in my clinic is tell introverted adults that the things that they've always been criticized for or felt like a freak about are perfectly normal for them and just part of who they are. There are times when people take that as such a relief that I almost feel like going, are we done here? Are we good? So if you're the parent of an introverted child, especially if you as a parent are an extrovert, I strongly recommend that you read up and really get educated on how introverted children experience the world. Back in my day, we didn't know about introverts and extroverts. There wasn't no such thing as that. We just bit on sticks. If you've not studied the topic before, you'll realize that, like I said, these kids live in a very different world than extroverted children, and they always will. And as a parent, you can do no better for your introverted child during the holidays than knowing when to give them permission to get out of the room, to exit, just to have some alone time and wind down. That a child is an introvert in itself doesn't necessarily mean the child doesn't want to see their family or spend time with their relatives or doesn't enjoy their family. Introverts need love too. But whereas extroverts are energized by contact with other people and find it exhilarating, extroverts tend to go out someplace and get all pumped up and they just feed on the people and the energy. Introverts as well may go out and enjoy themselves and feed on the energy and just really enjoy it. The main difference is that the extrovert goes home and it takes like 4 hours to come down, and the introvert comes home and collapses. Introverted people, kids, find socializing exhausting. Doesn't mean they don't like it. There's a book I would encourage you to read, and we're going to have some stuff up on the school website? So there'll be this link will be available. It's called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. It's a book that I use in my office to introduce introverts to themselves. So when I say it's a really good thing to educate ourselves about, I can't recommend anything higher than that. She also has a TED Talk, by the way, so if you're not a reader, like thick book, 20-minute talk, right? That summarizes the book fairly well. See, the nervous systems, we know this, the nervous systems of introverts are easily overstimulated in loud social situations. And parents, there is nothing you can do about it, and nothing you should do, except acknowledge it. It's not a character flaw. It doesn't need to be fixed, but it does need to be dealt with appropriately. People are wired differently, including young people, and the more we understand people, the more we can empathize with them and treat them in ways that they will experience as loving and encouraging. Isn't that what we want as parents? Of course. Almost all we want as parents. So there are some particular circumstances that may pose challenges for your child during the holidays. I want to suggest a few specific things you can do to help your child get through challenging holidays as smoothly as possible. Many thanks to Mrs. Julie Simonson, counselor at Seipel, who wrote an article for parents at Seipel that really inspired some of what, forget it, it didn't inspire me, I'm going to read it. It was good. She says, to help children that are struggling, I suggest a few things. First of all, be aware of changes in your children, like eating habits, secluding themselves, emotional outbursts. Sometimes all the extra stimulus is overwhelming. If you notice changes, then carve out some time to talk with your kids. Allow them to share their concerns in a kind of vent session without interruption. There may be tears or shouting, and that's fine. It's okay. It's actually healthy. By verbalizing these things, children have the opportunity to recognize errors in their thoughts. All right. Thanks, Julie. That was brilliant. Appreciate it. She sent that to me the other day, and I went, oh, I'm gonna pirate that. Secondly, oh, this is her too. I thought it was me again. Fortunately, it's her. Secondly, go over schedules with your children that struggle with change. As you look at holiday travel and family-filled days, recognize that your introverted children may need a place to retreat, to recharge during the festivities. So build that in, account for it, and talk with your children about how they can, take a break during the fun. And then her last paragraph, she says, remember to fill your child's love bucket. And this looks different for everyone. For some kids, it may be a hug, a compliment, a movie together. Others may need an unexpected note of encouragement or a random act of kindness. The idea is that we all receive love a little bit differently. Great words of wisdom from Julie, so thank you for that. So to move into this last section of the presentation, I want to spend some time talking to you about the most extreme and scary holiday blues of all, which are the kind of blues that can lead to clinical depression and to an increased risk of suicide. So before we really start digging into that, I want to get it in proper perspective. Here's the reality. Some of this may sound scary, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm not trying to scare anybody. In fact, what I really want to do is establish the facts and hopefully maybe expose that monster in the dark. So a lot of times those things that we fear so much, once we begin talking about them, we realize they're not as powerful as we feared. So some statistics for you. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24. It is the second leading cause of death for college-age youth and ages 12 to 18. Really tune in. You will not believe what I'm about to tell you. More teenagers and young adults die from suicide every year than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease combined. Each day in our nation, there are an average of over 3,470 attempts by young people, grades 9 through 12. Then, of course, if we factor in junior high kids, middle school kids, the numbers go even higher. And one of the things I really want to focus on here is this last statistic, that 4 out of 5 teens who attempt suicide have given clear warning signs. It's scary because 20% don't. And that's really scary. But 80% do. Your odds are really, really good if you know what to look for. Really good. So suicide is a scary thing to talk about, and it's a gigantic cause of death among people the age of our children. But it is nonetheless extremely rare. It's extremely rare. Between its rareness and the horror of even thinking about losing a child or even potentially losing a child, it's just an easy thing to avoid. I understand. That's our sort of intuitive thing that we tend to want to do. So it can be difficult to get parents the information and the resources they need to reduce the likelihood that this could happen. It's just too tempting to dismiss it. It'll never happen to my kid. My kid's fine. My kid's happy, and they're in a loving family and all of that. Well, statistically, you're largely right. If you say it'll never happen in my family, statistically speaking, you're almost right. It is pretty rare. It probably won't happen in your family, thank God. But what would be the cost? I'm always kind of thinking, what would be the stakes of something, right? That's a good way to sort of think about things. So the chance that it will happen is very low, thankfully. But what are the stakes if it does? Stakes are pretty darn high. And even if the child survives, and most people do, right? You guys, this is a scarring experience on a level that's hard to explain. And the incidence of suicide increases during the holidays for all demographics, not just kids. So I want to share a personal story with you and then wrap this up. The night of June 24th, 2011, my wife and I were in our living room watching television when our 14-year-old daughter, Anna, came out of the bathroom. And she was in a robe and, had her hair all up in a towel, like usual, and kissed me on the cheek, like usual. And like usual, said, "Good night, Daddy, love you," and kind of bounded upstairs to her room. And I just replied, "I love you, sweetheart. See you tomorrow." And unbeknownst to me at the time, she had, like 5 minutes earlier, ingested a huge amount of medicine from our cabinet, liquids and pills and stuff with plans to not wake up. I mean, she was serious, like big time. She even left a note. And she told me and Christy and her sisters that she knew that we all loved her and that her death wasn't our fault, and that she was confident we'd be sad at first, but then realize she really did the right thing by removing herself out of our lives. That's where our kids end up. Not just kids, but adults too. When they get to that place, they are not thinking. Rational people who are in their right minds don't do that. And so people come into my office and they tell me, "Yeah, I've been having thoughts lately that I just don't know if I can take the pain anymore." And I say, "Are you having suicidal thoughts?" And they go, "Well, I would never do that." And I say, "Do you think that all those people every year who succeed," what a terrible word for suicide, right? People who succeed, do you think that they didn't say that at one point? The problem is at some point something can shift. And that becomes something that seems like a reasonable thing. And that's what's scary about it. So our story, obviously, it's long, it's hard to tell. And I don't need to tell much more of it because I've written about it extensively on my blog. And if you'd like to hear more of the story, you can find it all there on the website. There'll be a link to the first of those posts, like 7 parts. I do want to tell you who don't know that, she did survive, thank God. She had, and thus we as a family had years of struggle, but I'm pleased to report that she's doing great. Really, really great. And she spent all of this time, writing the next chapter for herself. And it's a lot better than the last one. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is this. So I'm a therapist, and I work with suicidal teens all the time. Teens with suicidal thoughts, suicidal plans, even teens who've recently survived a suicide attempt and are sent to me the moment they're discharged from the hospital as part of their aftercare plan. Hospitals, if your kid does that, and your kid survives, they don't let your child leave the hospital until they have an appointment made with an individual counselor. So what I'm saying is I know the lay of this land pretty well. I know the risks, the signs, the things to watch out for. We have always been a close, loving family. My wife and I, between the two of us, have 5 college degrees. She's an educator. We're educated people. She teaches kids. We spent 8 years in youth ministry working with adolescents and teenagers. And we miss this. It's a hard thing to identify in people you love. It's hard. But remember, I just told you that 4 out of 5 kids give some kind of sign that they are suicidally depressed. The only signs Anna showed were some casual disclosures to a close friend of hers at the time who unfortunately didn't speak up. So parents, here's what I really want to say with this. I can't overstate how critical it is that you teach your child to speak up if one of their friends reveals this kind of information to them. Kids are kids. Even the kids with the best character will not always have the best judgment. It's not a character issue, it's a judgment issue. They need to specifically be told the truth about those situations, which is this: sweetheart, that secret is not yours to keep. So when one of your children's friends comes to them and says, I hate my life, I don't think I want to be here anymore, your child will be shocked and scared, terrified for their friend, and they won't have the first idea what to do unless you've already taught them. We came way too close to losing our daughter. And that happened when one other person on this planet knew she might be in danger and didn't bother to tell us. So one of the best ways to keep your child safe would be for all of us to create a community where every parent teaches every child not to keep this secret. Beyond this, there are other warning signs. Kids may retreat into their rooms, spend massive amounts of time there. If you see this happening, take notice and take action. Doesn't mean that they're suicidal or getting suicidally depressed, but it's good for us to notice and maybe to ask. And by the way, asking a person if they're thinking about suicide increases their risk of committing suicide by 0.0%. It actually decreases the likelihood that they will do it. That's a gigantic myth that we believe. If I bring it up, they're not. They're not. Because suicide is a cry for help. And when you ask someone about it, you're responding to that cry. Cutting, burning, peeling, scraping, mutilation, self-mutilation are strongly correlated with depression in children and in adults. If your child is doing this, or even if they talk to you about friends who are doing this, take notice and take action. Notice and take action if your child starts taking unnecessary risks or being super reckless or self-destructive. There are several other common warning signs, and they will be spelled out for you on the handout that will be available on the website. But I was thinking I'll bring handouts and distribute them at my talk. And then I thought about all the years I spent in the ministry handing out stuff and watching people leave and seeing every single handout on the floor. So I thought, if they think there's something worthwhile, they can go grab it. So I want to just close. I'm going to close here with one of these signs that I feel most strongly about. One of the most serious signs that your child may be thinking about suicide is that they keep talking about death, or about feeling hopeless or helpless or worthless. Or your teen actually says, I wish I was dead, or I wish I wasn't around anymore. And the reason I bring this up here is because I urge you to listen, parents, to the words that your children are saying. Because way too often I hear these situations where a kid says that right in front of the parent, and the parent snaps back. You're just trying to get attention. This is totally misguided, folks. Because if the child isn't serious about dying but just saying those things to get attention, they need some attention, y'all. Maybe far more attention than they're actually asking for. Probably so. They might need some weekly attention by somebody like me. You know what I'm saying? And if they are serious and they do actually want to die, then of course there's also a problem, and we'll be glad, we took them seriously. So that's an invitation. Those are opportunities for us to be able to invest in our kids and get close to them and let them talk to us while we remain calm and listen at a moment when we are scared to death. And that can be so hard. Why do we as parents so often find ourselves unable to calmly listen to our kids' struggles? It's because of our own fears, and those are well-founded fears. And then we have fears like being failures as parents. We panic for the safety of our children, feelings of incompetence, even anger toward the child for posing a possible threat to him or herself. That's what happened to me. I'm not proud of this, but I can't even say in polite company exactly what I heard come out of my own mouth when I realized what my daughter had done. I ran to her, I squeezed her face, her cheeks in my hands, and I yelled colorfully, which I will not do now, "Are you kidding me? Do you know what this would have done to me?" So when your child is that sad, that far gone, it's the scariest thing you can imagine, and you're not in your right mind. And the easiest thing in the world is to be carried along by the fear and never acknowledge or look inside or deal honestly with it, and just kind of continue acting toward our child out of our own fear rather than out of what's necessarily best for the child. Which brings me back to, see, I'm a preacher. I have to say I'm going to close several times before I actually do. Sorry about that. What do you expect? I'm a preacher. But we end here, right? Because we come back to the critical importance, parents, of doing our own work. The more our own anger problems, our own fears, our own blind spots are left unattended to, the more that they will affect our parenting, and that'll affect our children in ways that they will internalize and then pass on to your grandchildren. Count on it. So I encourage you, with everything in my being this evening, to make the pursuit of your own health and your own wholeness your highest priority, not only for yourself, but for the sake of your child. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak to you this evening.